This is the Atari 8-bit podcast.
Paul had said, you have good potential at this sort of thing, but you really need to choose. Are you going to keep building earth movers and equipment, or do you want to live in programming and doing games? And as it turns out, I chickened out.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Dan Reinhart published one program for the Atari 8-bit computers, Yahtman, a Yahtzee-style game that was published by Atari Program Exchange. Yahtman first appeared in the winter 1982-1983 APX catalog. I will read its description from that catalog to you. Yahtman by Dan Reinhart, recommended for ages 6 and up, written in BASIC and machine language. Play dice poker with Yahtman. Most of us have played some version of the popular dice poker games available in both paper/dice and computerized form, but Yahtman is a cut above the rest. For one thing, Yahtman joins in every game himself, along with 1 to 6 other players. For another, this fellow is very friendly. He sends messages and performs helpful chores throughout the game. And most unusual of all, he shows by his facial expressions what he thinks at all times, for good or bad. A game of Yahtman consists of 13 rounds of play for each player. In each round, you use a joystick controller to roll any or all of 5 dice up to 3 times to obtain one of 13 scoring combinations, such as aces, 3 of a kind, and full house. But you must select some combination each turn, even if you score 0 points. You earn bonus points for rolling 5 of a kind or for high scores. At the end of each round, Yahtman suggests which combination will earn you the most points, but you can't ignore him and pick any unused combination. As you study each choice, Yahtman helpfully displays the score you would earn by picking that choice. At the end of the game, Yahtman totals each player's score. The author invites written questions and comments. Review comments. Yahtman's human traits make him a more companionable computer opponent than normal. His helpful nature gives kids a better chance against adults. The user manual is very good. Requires Atari Basic Language cartridge, 1 Atari joystick controller. Order information. It was available on cassette, which required 16K of RAM, or diskette, which required 24K of RAM. Either way, it cost $22.95. It was APX catalog number 20175. This interview took place on August 28, 2017. In it, we discuss Paul Cubbage, whom I previously interviewed.
Back in the early 70s, I wound up in a position where I was helping design and build special machinery, special equipment for heavier industries. And as part of that, I'd worked on a welding machine for John Deere and worked on several machines for heavy-duty welding for Caterpillar, and had gotten to know the Caterpillar people and vice versa. And as it turns out, they took a shine to me, and when they had a retirement, they lost one of the key folks in an automatic welding program. They invited me to come to the retirement dinner, and I got cornered and asked would I be interested in coming to work for Caterpillar, which in 1974 was a very attractive thought, large corporation, well respected, and so forth. And I wound up working in a welding development area, building automated and self-guided welding machines. And after working in that for a while, I had some computational needs to calculate some of the thermal issues, heat dynamics and things that had to do with welding. And I was loaned the use of a PDP-11 computer, which at that time was a paper tape operating system, and this particular one also had a cassette system, which was really the nuts come 1976 or so. And I developed, it just clicked. I had an immediate passion for programming and computer work, and got heavily involved in doing assembly language programming. And with the PDP-11, even though I doubt there are very few of them left. They were truly a programmer's machine, right from the instruction set up, and I just had a great passion for it. And that passion continued, and I wound up ultimately working on early robots for welding industry. But doing computer support work, built a robot network to help Caterpillar store and maintain programs for welding robots. And worked up through a series of computers, PDP 1145s, which were a very fast machine with a math coprocessor, then the early VAXs, and these were all products from Digital Equipment Corporation, which was the initiator, really, of the mini-computer market. And at one time, they had more computers installed in the U.S. government than IBM and everybody else put together. They were the biggest in the world back in the 70s, which goes to show you how the fortunes of outfits in the computer business especially could change fairly quickly. From that, of course, I was in a corporate environment, and one of the things about corporate environment is over time you wind up sometimes being in heavily developmental phases that are a lot of fun. I was always had a yen for development, and other times you wind up doing things that are a bit more bureaucratic, at a slower tempo. And during one of those periods, I had acquired a Radio Shack TRS-80 computer, had a Zilog Z80 processor. Again, another one of those early consumer-oriented computer-in-a-box kind of a thing. But I was already familiar with the 8080 type instruction set, and the Zilog Z80 was absolutely the deluxe processor in that era for the small 8-bit machines. And I wrote a fair amount of software, a lot of recreational and so forth, for the TRS-80, and that was a home hobby. And then along came, a while later, the Atari systems, the Atari 400 and 800, and that was one darn good-looking system. And not only that, but it built on Atari's graphics abilities and then the wealth of programs that they had evolved, starting from the TV games back in the Pong era up through, at that time, I think, Space Invaders and Pac-Man and things that I guess still have some popularity with folks that like historic computing today. Well, at that particular time, I had written a number of programs for the Atari. I guess the animal game, where it tries to, I think most people write one of those in their programming career.
Sure. The
computer, guesses what animal are you thinking of, and every time you stump the computer, you're asked to add your animal and a defining question, and
right. Basic binary tree sort of.
You betcha.
Yeah.
And of course everybody in that era had to do the obligatory Star Trek game where you decide which way to move by how many squares, and the Klingons would shoot torpedoes at you, and you would respond accordingly. It was essentially a text-oriented game. Was not a full graphics game. But at that time, I had a young family. We just had our fourth child, our son, Eric. And I wanted something that the other kids could enjoy. They and their cousins, they had, I guess altogether, probably 15 cousins in and around their ages. And I thought a Yahtzee game would be perfect, because it was something that if you could add up dice, if you were old enough to throw dice and add the numbers, you were capable of playing with adults. And because there was so much randomness and not a whole lot of skill to it, it was a great equalizer between kids and adults. So that made a lot of sense to me. And I messed with that for a while, and I contacted the Parker game people, told them what I was up to. I wanted their blessing to program a Yahtzee game, and first indications that I got back was a letter, have at it. We're very happy for you, and we're delighted to see the further interest in blah, 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 blah,
Wow,
blah.
that's amazing right there.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen
Yeah, that was.
today.
So talk about encouraging.
Yeah.
Then about 3 weeks later...
Oh, I spoke too soon.
Yeah, exactly. So the first lawyer got in trouble. A few weeks later, a bigger lawyer sent that, no, it's absolutely, of course, I was going to credit intellectual property and so forth to Parker Brothers. But I got then the nasty gram arrived that previously disregard the previous communications, and it is our position that this is a trademark and so forth. So they slapped me around and didn't leave any opening even to talk about a royalty or anything like that. Well, but the idea was still a sound idea. And I had already done background digging. Yahtzee wasn't a creation of Parker Brothers or the predecessor firm that they bought it from. It was the game of yacht, Y-A, as I recall, Y-A-C-H-T, I believe was the traditional. And it was an old line dice game from that I think came from Europe, and it had been played for a long time. So even though people didn't know it as the game of yacht, they certainly could make the construal to Yahtzee, and I didn't discourage that construal. And I put together Yahtman, who would play the game of yacht.
Mm-hmm.
That was really facilitated by the Atari architecture. It was worth getting excited about if you love programming and machine language and architecture. And what Atari had done was take a fairly simple state-of-the-art processor. As I recall, I think it was a Rockwell. Oh, shoot.
Motorola 6502.
6502 processor, exactly, which was simple instruction set and a reasonably fast machine. But they had also created some special purpose chips, some custom chips, and one of them was called the Antic chip, which was a graphics generating chip. And the two of them were interfaced very intimately. And one of the things you could do that, to my knowledge, you couldn't do with any other processor, any other consumer system at that time. You could do it in the gaming consoles, but for a general purpose or more general purpose computer, you actually could go into interrupt service routines and do pixel by pixel, line by line control as the scan lines were generated on the monitor, which gave you absolutely full control, memory mapped video at video rates, and that was absolutely incredible. And I can't claim that I fully utilized that in Yahtman, but it was the Yahtman program. The dice playing algorithms were written at the basic level, but all the executable stuff, all the graphics and the noises it made and things were all in assembly language, and they were assembler calls from the basic language. Basic in Atari required a basic cartridge.
Sure.
Yeah, as I recall, in the left-hand slot. But the two worked together well. All the high-speed stuff took place at the machine level, and it was a wonderful challenge. And it was fairly straightforward to put together, except for the wisecracks and the I won't call them heuristics, but the behaviors that were at least mildly comical. The kinds of things that even kids could like. It was somewhat childish, maybe, but Yachtman would wink and blink and make fun of your choices and nag you from time to time, and it would do all that based on the context in the game plus random probabilities, so that he didn't do things in a linear way. He did the wisecracking and the funny expressions in a nonlinear kind of way, but they all tied in a way that made sense.
Mm-hmm.
So between the children and the cousins, we had plenty of beta testers, and we wrung the game out pretty well. And during that time, I had developed a friendship with a fellow named Jim Harlan in East Peoria, Illinois. And he had started a small computer shop in the back of Art's Hardware store in East Peoria, and had stocked it with some number of machines. And we just had a ball talking about computer stuff and watching the new things come in. At that time, in the industry, floppy disks were still being talked about, but hadn't really started issuing for a lot of the smaller computers. At that time, the new computer on the block was the Apple Lisa, which I believe did have a 5 1/4-inch floppy in it. And that was a state-of-the-art machine. It was to be the successor to the Apple II. It didn't quite take off that way.
Yeah.
But we finally got to the point where we decided that he liked that game, and we decided that to do something with it. Now, he had marketing inroads with some distributors, and of course I had the game, and we decided we would put together essentially an informal partnership. And I would make cassettes. It was at that time the bulk of all the Ataris were cassette-based systems.
Mm-hmm.
And he would take care of marketing them, and we would split the proceeds. It was a very simple kind of a thing. But in getting into it, it turned out that cassettes are notoriously, and have always been, consumer-type audio cassettes, notoriously unreliable for putting digital data on them and then being able to get the data back off in an intact manner.
Yeah.
So I wound up building, I looked at that time, I want to say Telex or Telco was a big builder of duplication systems, but those were being used by Atari and others, and not very successfully. Most of the people who did that for volume production had very low yields, had a lot of returns, sales returns, because of problems loading the cassettes. So I wound up developing a set of circuits that would allow me to inspect the quality of the signal on the tape as it was being copied on a duplicator. So I built up a 4-head duplicator with these inspection circuits on the readback heads. And I was able to produce first pass, 100% readable and loadable cassettes. And we had a lot of fun with that. Golly, at that time, I even wrote a poem, a Yahtman poem. I don't have that anymore. But the cassette versions had, I hired a local announcer who had a wonderful, soft, deep voice to read the Yahtman program. I think we did 5 or 6 takes and picked the best one. So the audio track that would play while the cassette was being loaded onto the Atari would recite the poem of Yahtman, or I forget if it was the Legend of Yahtman or but it was one more thing that the kids seemed to get a kick out of, and I don't know that it helped or hurt, but it was a fun exercise to go through. So
it would read that while the program was loading?
That's correct.
That's awesome. I need to find that now. That's cool.
Boy, I would like to hear that again. I don't think I even kept the masters. If I did, they're sure deeply buried. I'm planning to retire next year, and one of the things I'm going to do is unpack boxes that haven't seen the light of day or fresh air in a long time. And I might well run into that, because I did have the master tapes, and I tried to preserve them.
Wow. Well, let me put it out there. I mean, I know it's fine a year away, but when you do that, if you find them, or you find any unpublished programs, any little projects that you made and didn't finish, keep me in mind. If you let me borrow that stuff, I can move it to modern machines and digitize the cassettes and whatever you need done. So
gladly. That would be a riot. Yeah. So we even I even did my own artwork and worked with a local typesetter, because again, in that day and age, you didn't do that sort of thing often. There were no desktop PCs at that time. And Then we went and contracted with a local printer for all the cassette inserts and advertising tear sheets and all that kind of stuff. Went through that exercise. And we wound up selling, as best I can recall, we sold about 1,200 on cassettes, and mostly through a distributor called High Tech down in St. Louis. And it just worked for the months that was a going enterprise. We stayed busy. I cut cassettes. Jim sold them, packaged them, and shipped them. So.
Nice. And the publisher was Computer Core Software, I believe.
Yeah, that was Jim Harlan's company name that he had adopted. So we picked that as a company name for the representation of it.
So how did you sell it? Was it just did you mail order it all, or?
We sold them in wholesale to High Tech. High Tech at that time had racks in stores, and I assume also took mail order. Mm-hmm. We didn't do any mail order marketing directly. It was somewhere down the road that I'd crossed paths with a gentleman named Paul Cubbage at Atari, and he was the one that planted the seeds that finally led to putting the Yahtman program into their Atari Exchange, so that it had corporate marketing behind it, and it was essentially a commercial for sale user group marketing.
Sure. So how did you meet? Yeah. How did you meet Paul?
Well, I wish I could remember the year. It was probably 81 or thereabouts. This was prior to the time that they had the Las Vegas CES shows every year. At that time, computers were still very new, except for the mini computers. They'd been around a while. But you had traveling computer shows that would go to major cities around the country. And at that time, there was one in Chicago, a consumer electronic type show, and I had a Yachtman in my pocket, and had gone to that show with a friend, looking at mini computers primarily. But Atari had a booth, and I went out of my way to see the new offerings and to talk to them. And Paul Cubbage was in there staffing that booth, and we just hit it off. And Paul was a few years older than I was, but he, in a sense, he took a mentoring posture with me. We exchanged data, we chatted now and then, and when things started not working so well for Atari, and they decided somewhere through there to set up the Atari Program Exchange. They weren't producing gaming, I don't think, so much from Atari factory direct, but they were looking for more revenues and more base from the Atari Exchange. I put the program into the Atari Exchange, and as best I can recall, I think we probably sold another 800 or so at that point. So there, again, just thinking back, 35 years, and my memory isn't great, but I'm thinking there were probably 2,000 sold copies of Yachtman that made it to the marketplace.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So, yeah.
So was it? I mean, I assume it didn't make you huge money, but sounds like it did. Did something.
Yeah, it was a nice subsidy to cover the. It was gracious. Right. It didn't change my standard of living one bit. It did help subsidize somewhat keeping current on the equipment. As much as anything, it justified to my wife, to the boss, my spending so darn much time in front of computers. Finally, here was a payback. So one could construe that it was justified. But I had Atari. Ultimately, they caught on to the error-free duplication stuff, and I had been invited to come out and speak to their people about this technique and talk about the circuitry and things. And then something happened inside their corporation, and the day arrived when just the conversation dried up. The people that I'd been talking to weren't there anymore. and that part of it just left off. There was a time, though, when Paul had told me, it was prior to the Atari starting to come unglued, that Paul had said, you have good potential at this sort of thing, but you really need to choose. Are you going to keep building earth movers and equipment, or do you want to live in programming and doing games? And I really thought about that a lot. He gave me good advice, and this was a fairly pointed set of comments that he made. And as it turns out, I chickened out. I could probably have worked it out to leave Caterpillar and have a job out at Atari. And I don't know where that would have taken me, but it would have taken me out of the Midwest. And at that time, we had living grandparents and kids in school, and we had roots. And I had a responsible position. I was a project development engineer, which was kind of midway up the ladder of development R&D people at that time in that part of Caterpillar. And I just didn't take the risk, and I can't believe that it would have worked out better, but in an odd moment or two, it's nice to think that I might have had an opportunity to be in that business.
You might have been in the business for a good 6 months before you were laid off by Atari.
Yes.
You probably made the right choice. I mean, really.
I think so. At that time, I was hot stuff on. I had been doing operating system work on PDP-11s at work. I was very, very deeply into an operating system called RSX-11D. That was one of the first, really scalable multi-programming type systems, and also then a successor of a thing called RSX-11M. So I was doing a good deal of OS related and a lot of assembler programming for PDP-11s. And that probably would have been where I would have branched to, because at that time those were still very popular machines. So had the Atari thing not worked out, I would have been in Silicon Valley with 100,000 other guys programming things like PDP-11s and VAXs. So.
Sure. So did you do any other big-ish projects for the Atari computers that you didn't release?
No, I've moved on from that and got engaged in some market-related work, frankly, some commodity trading kinds of things. And I built a good number of programs that allowed me to have the Atari scanning news feeds. I bought commercial news feed to come into the house and had it scanning for items of interest and then dumping out full articles. I found that if I just printed the news wire, it was about 3,000 sheets a day. I would burn a box of paper a day. And so I developed the scanners for that. So it would only
so the Atari was getting everything, scanning for keywords, and then printing out selected articles?
Then, what it had, recent buffer, once I typed it, that is, it had been identified as something of interest, it had dumped the whole article and so forth. And I also did some utility things. We built a little tiny one-transistor interface, and for some of the friends that had line printers and deck writers, I built drivers, software drivers, and hardware interface to come out a joystick port and drive line printers, which was also rather short-lived. So the Atari stayed active in our lives. A lot of VisiCalc. That was an early spreadsheet program that actually, I think it's been said that VisiCalc sold more apples than any other sales tool they had during that time. But it was the original spreadsheet program, and it was wonderful when we were just coming along in the age of the 10-key type calculators, and then they got a little more sophisticated, could do some math functions and so on. Well, and then comes VisiCalc, and all of a sudden you can do matrix work and business calculations and keep records. It was it was really a small revolution in itself. So I used a good deal of VisiCalc. And then from there, life got busy in other avenues, and I moved away from that part of the small computer business.
Nice. And what do you do today?
Oh, I work for the Navy. I'm involved at the Naval Surface Warfare Center that's at Crane, Indiana. It primarily is an ammo dump, but it also has a large number of high technology things like night vision goggles, targeting systems for aircraft, a lot of technical things, as well as a lot of earthy things. And we still store a great deal of the Navy's munitions there. It's a 100 square mile base. It's inland. The story behind that was in the early 40s, the government was concerned about having a large place to manufacture and store munitions that was beyond the reach of enemy bombers. And in looking at available properties and looking at how far inland from each shore you wanted to be, it turned out that this Crane area was perfect for their needs. It had no nearby towns, which is still one of the drawbacks. You pretty much, everybody has to drive a half hour, give or take, up to an hour to get to work, because they built it in a rural area, which has remained largely a rural area. But it has 5,000 people or so on the base, and I work in a technology-related area there.
Very nice.
Yeah, it's not like back in those early Atari days. It was a cottage industry back then. A one-person shop could start up and do meaningful things, and just about everything you did was a pioneering effort. And even though 100 other people might have done it, when you did it yourself in your context, it was still a pioneering effort, and the creativity, the creative impulse was with you when you were doing that kind of work. And I do miss that sort of fire and that sort of dedication to fascinating things. At least in my world today, we're corporate enough that it's more important to have a good standard operating procedure than it is to make a developmental leap forward. And the leap forwards were always a good deal of a lot of reward in them.
So did the kids enjoy Yachtman? I mean, that's really what it was for.
Absolutely. Good. Sure. It was fun. They knew enough to play it on their own. They didn't need an adult to load it, especially after it came out on the diskette version. So it remained as popular as any of the board games in the house. So nice. It didn't have a monopoly, but it certainly took its place.
Well, I've played it a bit. I find it adorable. I love the little Yachtman guy, and he makes these little faces like he's thinking and like he's, I don't know, critical of the choices you're making. And it's just it's super cute. And his little messages, and it's fun and well done.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yep.
All right. I think this is my last question. Sure. Well, first of all, is there anything I haven't asked you about those times that I should have?
Well, let me ask you about this. Was that you who called me in right around the year 2000 about signing off on having the programs ported and for archival and for use with emulators and so on? That was you, wasn't it?
That was me. I emailed you and tried to email as many APX authors as I can. It was around right around 2000, and I'm just trying to get permission to put them at atariarchives.org. At that time, that was I was trying to do it, trying to get permission and trying to do it the right way. And so we had a little bit of contact in, but your email address changed since then. So you were tricky to find for the interview. Yeah, so now I basically, we are archiving, we're still working on archiving all the APX stuff, me and a couple of buddies, and really getting down to the end of having every piece of software, every manual, every some of them are quite rare and some of them aren't. So it's been a challenge that literally has lasted 20 years.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible, Kevin. That's a big contribution. That's a lot of history, a lot of pioneering work, a lot of about where we came from in the consumer industry, gaming and desktop, and I think that's extremely laudable, and I'm impressed with what you've done.
Thanks. Yeah, my latest thing has been I've been doing lots and lots of interviews, and sort of a subplot within that is talking to as many APX programmers as possible, and I've done more than half now, so it's all bonus at this point. I was trying to get half, and so now we're more than there. So if you could send a message to the Atari 8-bit community that still exists, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
I'm extremely grateful the Yahtman that the Yahtman survived. I would never have guessed. My previous long-lasting program was a networking program used within Caterpillar for over a decade. I didn't know it at that time either, but the question came to me a decade after the fact of, gee, they had some problems and blah, blah, blah. I couldn't believe they were still running a program for a decade. Well, we're talking about Yahtman, who really has been around for, 36 years or so. He's older. Anyway, I find it a blasted miracle, and I'm glad it survived. It was a lot of fun to write, and I sure appreciated all the folks that had kind things to say about it. So.
Excellent. Great. Well, I have what I need. Thank you so much, Dan.
Sure, Kevin. Look forward to talking to you next decade.
Excellent. Very good. All right.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Take care. Bye.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, there are two ways you can help. You can help fund these interviews directly by contributing to my Patreon. A small monthly contribution will help offset the expenses of making these oral history interviews. Contribute at patreon.com/Savitz. Or make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.